Hello everyone, Mark here. So today we're going to be talking about perspective, criticism, and a little Rorschach test that I ran recently. For those who are following the primary group where Daito-ryu is being talked about in the English language on Facebook, you will know that I am a frequent poster there. I post a lot of questions, a lot of content, and I try to. It's probably one of the primary platforms through which I interact with people interested on the subject of Daito-ryu, either other practitioners or people that are just curious about the tradition in some way, shape, or form. And recently, I posted a list of 5 videos, that were basically just annotated with the question, any thoughts? I didn't put more than that. I actually didn't give any of my own thoughts on the subject of the videos that I was posting. All I really did was essentially 2 things. I think one person left a comment saying, well, we shouldn't be criticizing other people's videos, to which I responded, well, if you have somebody who makes a video for educational purposes, which if you'll notice all those videos purpose they were all except one, instructors in front of a camera teaching stuff, then if you're doing that, then clearly you're explaining something, and we can be critical about that, especially if you're demonstrating what you're explaining. And then the other line of inquiry that I engaged in was regarding translation. I think there's one person who said, YouTube translation, auto translation really doesn't do a very good job. And, what is he saying? What is the instructor saying, basically? For which, basically, I provided some amount of translation. If you go back to those videos, you'll see that I've basically locked the comments on all of them, and I've edited the initial text to state that this was part of a little experiment that I was running, without necessarily explaining what the experiment was, and that's what I'm the purpose of this video is today. The reason why I put these videos out was basically to kind of get to learn a little bit more about people on this forum in general, but really as I was considering basically that forum a bit like a good sample of what you might find on other social media, and perhaps a little bit more at large in terms of of population of people that might be interested in Daito-ryu in some way, shape, or form. I wasn't really interested in the actual feedback, whether it be criticism or basically saying, this is a really great demo. I was more interested about how people would actually respond. And by that, I mean, in what format, in what language would they use? What would be the area in which they would focus? And in that aspect, it was a really interesting experiment. I actually want to take the time today to share some of those results, because I think they will give you a good idea of the final point that I wish to make in this video. Well, first of all, there's one person that commented outside of the video, stating that, well, we shouldn't basically be judgmental of other people's presentations unless we have material of our own to present, ideally a video that basically demonstrates the same technique that one wishes to criticize. I personally disagreed with that. Basically, the point I was making was the point I made earlier. If you put something out there, you're basically you're putting yourself out there to be judged in some way, shape, or form. People will agree with what you're doing, or they won't. more specifically, there are things for which you don't really need to actually, pop out a camera and record yourself. There are things that you can perfectly describe in terms of, well, this is what I'm seeing there, right? Good, bad, or ugly. So I disagreed a little bit with that, but I understood the spirit of the comment. Basically, the point was, well, we don't want random people just being reactionary, which is something, for instance, that happens quite a fair bit sometimes on platforms like Reddit, for instance, right? The second type of comment that I got, and it actually was really one, and there was one comment in one video where the individual was making unsubstantiated claims pertaining to the specific history of Daito-ryu, basically making a claim about how Daito-ryu was basically transmitted through the Satsuma domain, and so on and so forth. Really, there aren't any historical records pointing in that direction. So I basically engaged in a discussion with the individual about that specific subject. But it was very interesting to see that, like, some people basically were interested to make claims they weren't really able to properly support. Surprisingly enough, it was only one, so that was, I was expecting a few more of those, but great. That means that people actually think twice before making statements about history. That's a good thing. A lot of the feedback that I received actually came through direct message. Now, one of the common theme from a lot of people from really a broad range of lineages was, well, my teacher doesn't allow me to go online and criticize or speak about my practice, I should say. That's a good thing. I'm really glad to hear that this is the case, that a lot of other lineages are, following what I would consider good practices of basically saying, well, if you're a student, you're a student, basically. You're not out there. You're not supposed to go out there and start to, necessarily criticize other people's practice, in good or in bad, really. You shouldn't praise somebody else's practices as much as you shouldn't criticize it, right? This being said, when engaging in one-on-one, I think some of them gave me some really interesting feedback on what they were seeing. I really enjoyed the fact that most people had that reached out directly, and again, with few exceptions, most people were extremely thoughtful. You could feel the weight behind their each of their thought, basically, and that's a good thing. Again, that's what you expect from somebody who is a serious practitioner of whatever art they engaged in. So that was good. There were a few comments that were more like, oh, this is great, kind of random, more reactionary. Most of them were positive. You didn't see any negative one. I suspect it's due to the nature of that group, potentially. If I would have run the same experiment somewhere else. And as a matter of fact, I had a recent experience on a different platform where it didn't go all too well. I won't go into any more details than that. But, basically, I think that may explain why there were fewer criticism. Now, so overall, it was a very interesting experiment, and it was really meant to kind of learn a little bit more how people react, basically. Do they just upvote, downvote, or, basically put a like, that was basically the vast majority of people that interacted. That's how they kind of put their vote in. Some people reached directly. Some people left comments publicly. Some were good, some were questionable. And most people were pretty polite in the way they were expressing themselves. So it was very interesting. Now, a few things that I noticed that were interesting, and that really pertains to the specific of why I selected most of those videos. The reason why I selected those 5 ones was that they all had predominantly two things in common. One, they were all in Japanese, except one who didn't have any voiceover or anything. And number two, they all had at least one major flaw. And what I mean is, basically a flaw that anyone, Daito-ryu or not Daito-ryu, should be able to spot, I think. And yes, that includes the short clip of the technique I was executing, basically, that was posted on Instagram by an acquaintance of mine. Yes, that one too had a major flaw. And that's actually one of the reasons why I posted it, was just to kind of make the point that I am more than willing to, show video content of myself where I know for a fact there's something that's not done right. But that was the point, basically, is to say, well, there's clearly, there's things that are really specific that are done incorrectly. I wanted to see whether people would spot them or not. Some have, some didn't. Some basically, they saw something different. And again, that's not a good or a bad thing. I was just really interested to see, in seeing what people were seeing, essentially, right? Not necessarily to basically get a certain answer specifically. And so it was kind of interesting. I think the people who saw the major flaws, basically, they tended to come from a broader background. It seemed so. So that was very interesting. Then the other thing that I was a little bit surprised about is that I only received one request for translation. Now, this may be because people are not familiar with the fact that I do translation, I guess. But I was a little bit surprised that everyone focused on what was being shown, but not necessarily on what was being said. And that basically told me something about where people focus, basically. They basically just take in what they can, and if there's a voiceover and elaboration in Japanese, they're probably going to miss what's going on. Or maybe some have turned the subtitles on, but apparently on many of those videos the subtitles were quite horrendous. So if anyone did that, I would be surprised if they were able to really get to the point of what was being explained. But that was interesting, basically. For me as a practitioner, I want to be able to look at content and material that is as close as possible to the source of my practice, or at least of the source of what I study at any given point in time, right? I don't want to be limited to translation written by other people, and I don't want to be limited to the teachings of foreign students who may or may not be familiar with the Japanese language and culture, and may or may not have really fully internalized the concepts of their tradition, due to either there's maybe a barrier culturally or linguistically, and that kind of impacts transmission. But regardless, you don't really want I don't really want personally to have to deal with that, right? And it's one of the reasons why I went to Japan in the first place. It's also one of the reasons why I both continue and pursue study of the culture in general and the language, but also why I promote the study of the language and the culture in general, so that future generations of Daito-ryu practitioners can be better equipped to not only practice, but also just study and learn and imbue themselves in the culture of the tradition, and hopefully basically go deeper into the tradition than perhaps people like me will ever be able to go. Overall, that was basically an experiment in trying to see what kind of perspective people have in their practice. What do they actually study when they say they're a practitioner of Daito-ryu, or when they say that they're interested in Daito-ryu? And it was really interesting, was really informative, and it gave me a lot of food for thoughts that I hope I'll be able to use productively in future videos so that I can craft them in a way that will be as interesting and on point as possible for the viewers as I can make it. That's it for today. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to put them down in the comments below. As always, thank you for your time, and until next time.